Hey everyone, and welcome back to Steven Watches Movies. I'm Steven, and I love watching movies. In honor of May 4th, I have decided to do my first ranking video on, well, what else? Star Wars. I'll be ranking all 11 live-action Star Wars films, so that's prequel, original, and sequel trilogies, as well as Rogue One and Solo. Now, we all know that rankings can be controversial. I feel like most of what's on my list are probably similar to others, but then I've got a couple of choices on this list that may ruffle some feathers and will have some people scratching their heads. But I think most likely what's included in my top 3 is going to be, cause the most stir. My ranking is going to be based on a variety of factors. So storytelling, dialogue, effects, direction, rewatchability, impact on film history, and perhaps most of all, how I feel as a Star Wars fan watching the film. Maybe a dash of nostalgia in there as well? Possibly. We'll find out. So for fairness of this video, I decided to rewatch all 11 films that I'm going to be ranking today, because there were a few that I haven't seen in a long time. There were some, like for instance, Rise of Skywalker, I only saw once in 2019 when it came out. And then there's others like A New Hope or Phantom Menace that I've seen loads of times. So I just thought it was fair if I rewatch them all in one big grouping, and so that way I can truly give a definitive ranking, well, for today at least. I was a little hesitant to include Rogue One and Solo in this ranking, but since they are connected to the main Star Wars storyline, especially Rogue One, I decided to include them. Please leave your rankings in the comments, and if you think Attack of the Clones should have been higher on this list, please let me know. Star Wars talk can sometimes ignite intense debates and discussions, so just please be respectful to the other viewers and their rankings. We all have our own tastes, and like I said, my ranking that I'm going to unveil right now is not based on objective good or bad. It's a variety of factors. But anyway, let's dive in. Number 11, Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So first up, the worst entry in the saga is The Rise of Skywalker. So I actually did a pre-ranking before I watched all of these films again, and Rise of Skywalker was actually initially in the number 10 spot, and then I rewatched them all, and it got bumped down to number 11. Like I said in my intro, I'd only watched Rise of Skywalker once before this, in 2019 when it came out, so I was actually really happy to rewatch it, even though it made me angry. It's such a weird entry to the series. It's the last one, it's the end, well, for now anyway, and yet instead of trying to go with a bang, they spent most of their energy and focus trying to undo everything that the previous installment did, The Last Jedi. That's not really what you should be focused on when you're concluding a 9-film saga. With the combination of the reception of The Last Jedi, the removal of Colin Trevorrow as director, and of course the death of Carrie Fisher, instead of hastily patching this thing together in a film that the studio thinks the fans will like, they should have just pushed the release date and worked on actually fleshing this out more. And I know that, it's kind of interesting to say, because if they did push the release date to, let's say, 2020, well, we all know how that would have went with the pandemic. But I really think that they should have taken the time to really make a film, worthwhile in the series. Actually, speaking of fleshing it out, I know that this is a complaint amongst many, so this is not a new thought at all, but the fact that they had no actual plan for this trilogy, and they were just going to let the 3 directors play, probably not the best idea. Say what you want about the original or prequel trilogy, but there was a plan in place, and George Lucas knew what he wanted out of every single entry and where it was headed. The sequel series is just a mess in general, and honestly, if Rise of Skywalker was a good to great film, then I think it may have been able to salvage that, and it wouldn't feel as messy as it does. But I can't wrap my head around what they were trying to do with this trilogy, and especially Episode 9. Rise of Skywalker throws a lot at the wall to see what sticks. You've got plot twists, you've got fan service, you've got Palpatine. And listen, I'm not opposed to Rey being the granddaughter of Palpatine. I'm not. I just don't think we needed to see Palpatine back. That's all. And again, this kind of goes back to my last point of I would have probably been fine with Palpatine back if it was set up properly from the start, right from Force Awakens. But it's not. So I made some notes while watching these films, and I have by far the most notes on Rise of Skywalker, mostly because I was absolutely floored by how truly terrible some parts are in this film. The one I wrote down about Palpatine's return specifically, though, is I do like the whole unnatural line because it's a callback to episode 3 and it actually makes good on what he told Anakin. So this is a line that he says within the first 2 minutes of the film.
Side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Because it's kind of like, how can you be back? How can you return? And he uses the line that he said in episode 3.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
And so I did. I liked the fact that it was a callback to episode 3. This was one of those callbacks that actually, for me, worked. I still don't like the fact that he returned, but I do like that callback, and it does make good on what he told Anakin. In that respect, it works for me a little bit. A little bit. I still don't like the fact he returned, though. The pacing in this film is light speed ahead, and it just feels like there's so much in this film, but none of it really matters. It's all about getting the Wayfinder. It's all about getting to Exegol. That's it. There are some really great things to be explored, like legacy and identity, that the first 2 films teed up, and this film strikes out on. So that's really, really disappointing. You know, Rise of Skywalker feels more like an obligation than a finale. Like, oh, we have to make a 3rd film because, well, we made the first 2, instead of actually crafting a proper end to this 9-film saga. So, again, it tried to please everyone and ended up pleasing no one. If you're a Rise of Skywalker lover, please let me know. Please let me know why. I would love to understand. Number 10, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. All right, number 10 is Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Now, this one is a difficult watch. The pacing is inconsistent, the dialogue is absolutely terrible, even for a Star Wars film, and the romance between Padme and Anakin is just awkward as hell. The reason why it comes in at number 10 instead of number 11 is because at least it had a clear path. There was a point to the film. Like Rise of Skywalker, it is a mess, but it's a planned mess. It's a creative mess. It's not a mess because of straight up incompetence or we need to get this film out in 2 years kind of thing like Rise of Skywalker. Now, getting into that mess, my main complaint with Attack of the Clones is its heavy reliance on CGI. The Phantom Menace was kind of 50-50. There were practical elements, there were some practical sets, and you can feel it. You can feel the difference from Episode 1 to Episode 2. Episode 2 is devoid of any life and personality and texture because of the heavy-handed CGI. Characters are clearly interacting with fake environments. Now, Revenge of the Sith had this problem too, but not quite as bad. Attack of the Clones isn't all bad. The notes that I wrote down were actually positive. You know, I do enjoy Kamino and the clones. Ewan McGregor saves this film in some respects. The seeds of the Empire are planted here, and it's cool to see the beginnings of what is to come. That was pretty much it. I didn't really make much notes because I grew up with the prequel trilogy, and so I've seen Attack of the Clones many, many times. Way too many times for this bad of a film. But anyway. Number 9, Solo. Solo is not a bad film, so in some ways it really doesn't deserve to be this low. However, the reason it's this low is because the film is just kind of unnecessary. A Han Solo origin story is not as essential to the overall storytelling like Rogue One is, where it kind of sets up A New Hope. Solo just sets up, well, Han Solo and Chewbacca, Lando, the Millennium Falcon, the Kessel Run, things that we have seen and heard through the series. So for that, I rank it lower on this list because there are other films that are just more important. Alden Ehrenreich does a pretty good job, actually. He's not Harrison Ford, but he's not enough Harrison Ford for it to be distracting, if that makes any sense. There are some highlights that actually make this a pretty fun movie. It is a pretty fun ride. I specifically want to call out Donald Glover. He is awesome as Lando. He looks and feels like a young Lando, and he steals every scene he's in, hands down. The train heist is kind of cool. Woody Harrelson brings some Woody Harrelson energy. I actually found the train heist to be more exciting than the Kessel Run, which is both disappointing because we heard about the Kessel Run in A New Hope, and also a problem because the train heist really isn't the main draw of the film. The production wasn't a smooth one, and it clearly shows. But like I said, this film isn't bad. It just simply is just not that great either. The one little fan service thing that I liked in this film, though, was Lando being corrected, because he kept calling Han Solo Han Solo.
Anything Han? It's Han, but that's okay.
When I watched Empire Strikes Back, I noticed that Lando kept calling him Han. So I'm kind of glad that they did that in Solo, just to kind of loop back around on him. Number 8. Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. I'm definitely going to get some heat for this one. I initially had Return of the Jedi at number 7 on my list, and then I dropped it down by 1 on my rewatch. The reason why Return of the Jedi for me is number 8 is because I don't particularly like this movie overall. Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, there are moments of absolute brilliance, okay? Everything with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor is top-notch stuff. Everything else, I don't really like. So I despise the Ewoks. Leia and Han, I just think for the majority of the film, they're just kind of sidelined in terms of like actual impact and importance. You know, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, the 3 characters were integral to everything. And then Return of the Jedi, it just felt like, you know, it was the Luke and Vader show. I don't know. That's just how I felt when I watched it. And I've never really, like I gotta be honest, I don't think I've ever purposely put on Return of the Jedi. I think I've only ever watched Return of the Jedi when watching the trilogy as a whole. Obviously, I have to finish it. I have to cap it off. But I don't know. I don't connect with this film much. Other than, of course, the Luke, Vader, and Emperor scenes. Anything with any of those 3 going on, fantastic. Love it. The reason why I don't have this lower on my list, which I'm sure people would be like, oh my god, it's already low enough. Like, what do you mean lower? Is just the third act. So the third act with, like I said, with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor, it's truly great. Luke being confident in his abilities is nice to see. It's a change from Empire Strikes Back. Listen, the Ewoks are not a bad choice in the grand scheme of things because, like George Lucas has said, Star Wars is designed for kids. So that makes sense. But when you follow up Empire Strikes Back with this film, it just falls flat for me. Number 7, Episode 7, The Force Awakens. The beginning of the Disney era comes in at number 7. This choice will probably divide a lot of people since Now You Know The Last Jedi comes ahead of The Force Awakens on this list, and we'll get into that in a bit. The excitement for The Force Awakens back in 2015 was insane. So I remember when it was announced that they were going to do a new trilogy of films. I honestly thought that, of course, it's going to make money. Any Star Wars movie is going to make money. But there just wouldn't be that appetite for it. And because the reception of the prequels, and, you know, George Lucas wasn't actually going to be involved, even though fans have kind of, you know, revolted on him in recent years. But I was wrong. You know, the trailer looked incredible. You had practical environments, great looking CGI. You had some interesting mysteries that were going to have to be solved or were going to play out in the film. The Millennium Falcon was back in all its glory. And of course, Han Solo, Harrison Ford, was returning. So it looked great. And I was very excited for it. I know everybody that I knew was excited for it as well. And I enjoyed it. Even after rewatching it for this ranking, I found myself having a fun time with it. It is a fun movie. That's not really part of the issue for me. So the issue is that The Force Awakens feels like Marvel meets Star Wars. Kinda. You know, it's the Marvel feel of filmmaking that for me just doesn't sit right because it doesn't fit. There's a disconnect there. Now, don't get me wrong. I enjoy Marvel films. I enjoy them quite a lot, actually. I just don't want that Marvel feeling in Star Wars. The thing that actually made Marvel pop into my head initially when I was rewatching Force Awakens was the humor. There's too much of it, and it feels just forced because it's coming from like every single character. You know, episodes 1 to 6 always had humor in them, of course, but in small doses and in the right moments. And yeah, like some of the jokes maybe didn't work out, but it didn't quite feel as forced as episode 7. But now that it's owned by Disney and it has this sort of like Disney humor vibe, it's very close to that Marvel humor vibe. And so that was the first thing that popped into my head for that Marvel connection. But as I kept watching, I just realized that the whole film just has this like Marvel feel that I just couldn't shake. And honestly, I can't really articulate fully why I feel that way, but it just felt that way. The other issue I have with this film is that Rey is just too powerful too soon. I don't mind her being powerful, just not that quick. This is an issue that I actually feel extends throughout the whole trilogy, but mostly Awakens and Rise. And that's a huge mistake by the filmmakers, I think, because what makes Anakin and Luke so interesting and exciting, especially Luke, I suppose, is seeing the knowledge and abilities build over time. You know, seeing the confidence build in Luke over the 3 films is incredible. And let me say this, I like Rey as a character. I really, really do. I think the filmmakers failed her. Because I think she could have been an all-timer, and they failed her. And I do think that Rey and The Force Awakens are probably all-timers for a lot of fans. You know, they really do love them, especially people who grew up with this trilogy. Like, I grew up with the prequels, so the prequels are sort of my jam. So to me, the prequels didn't ruin Star Wars. They were Star Wars. And so same could probably be said for the sequel trilogy of people who grew up during that time. And one last brief negative thing, you know, so much of this film is the original trilogy's bones with just new clothes and different names placed on top. You know, so many pieces of this film just feel recycled, and there's not a lot that's new and exciting and fresh. Anyway, let's end on a positive note though. The film is well crafted, the CGI is excellent, there are some truly amazing sequences in this film. Seeing Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford return was the nostalgia bait that we all wanted and that we got. And like I said, this film is a fun ride. It really is. This film has many shortcomings, which is why it's at number 7. But really, I would say this film is possibly the most fun in the entire saga. At the end of the day, it was a pretty solid foundation to start the new trilogy on, so I can't complain too much. Number 6, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace, the film that turned original Star Wars fans to practically riot. Yeah, I grew up with the prequels. I remember seeing Sebulba plastered all over my Taco Bell meal as a kid. And it's funny that I remember that because really, Sebulba wasn't really much of an impact in the film, so I don't really know why he was all over the packaging. And I think there was even a Sebulba toy that they had. I might be wrong about that, but I don't know why I remember so much about Taco Bell. But anyway, that's just sort of what I remember in terms of merchandise. I do remember the action figures and all that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, I have no idea if I saw this in theaters or not, but I do remember wearing out the VHS copy once that was released. I watched this over and over and over again. I loved this film as a kid, honestly. You know, I had posters, I had merch. My cousin and I would lightsaber duel anytime that he came over, and I loved Darth Maul. I thought he was the coolest thing ever. You know, to be fair, I loved all villains when I was a kid. You know, Scar and the Joker and any sort of villain in any TV series or movie. For some reason, I was drawn to them because they were just so cool. And Darth Maul with the face and the horns and the double-bladed lightsaber, that was the coolest thing as a kid. Honestly, I remember I wanted one so badly. You know, even though I liked all villains when I was a kid, you know, in 1999, Darth Maul was tops. I even went as Darth Maul for Halloween. That's how much I love Darth Maul. And, you know, I think for me, it was the look, it was the voice, it was that double-bladed lightsaber that I loved so much. You know, are you kidding me? Child Steven loved this dude. So now's a good time as any to maybe say that nostalgia is creeping into this selection just a tiny bit. It's maybe lifted The Phantom Menace in my rankings. I'll be honest, it is a possibility. Now, with that being said, because I didn't grow up with the original trilogy, I wasn't bound to that trilogy. I had no allegiance to any specific Star Wars trilogy or film. You know, Star Wars was just cool. The Phantom Menace was just cool. I loved it. And so I remember actually after Attack of the Clones came out, I rewatched all 5 films. And I love them all. Star Wars was a great time. So yes, The Phantom Menace has flaws, of course it does, but I think it's unfairly hated by so many. The two main complaints I hear about are Jar Jar Binks and trade routes. So I actually don't mind the character of Jar Jar Binks, I just think it may have been a little too soon for a fully CGI character of that magnitude. George Lucas's dependence on CGI kind of started here, and I just don't really understand it. It was the late 90s. The technology really wasn't ready for his vision specifically. I know effects like in films like Jurassic Park, for instance, it made it feel like the technology was ready, but that's the thing, is that the effects in Jurassic Park were targeted. There were specific uses for the technology, and it wasn't just, we are going to replace every set with CGI, and we're going to build these fully CGI characters in Yoda and Jar Jar Binks and the like. So I just don't think it was ready, but I don't mind the character of Jar Jar Binks. And then, of course, we've got the taxation of trade routes, which still receives laughter to this day, and I'm not really sure why. I loved the politics of it all when I was a kid. Queen Amidala, the Senate, the Trade Federation. It was dope. I loved it. But adult Star Wars fans who grew up with the original trilogy just weren't interested in it. So I don't get it. And now in 2025, the taxation of trade routes doesn't sound so stupid, now does it? It's literally been in our media every single day for the last couple of months. I just think George was maybe ahead of the curve on that one. Speaking of George, though, I kind of wish that he didn't direct the prequel trilogy. Not that I don't like him as a director, and not that I wanted him gone, but I think he should have given it the Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi treatment, where he writes it, he produces it, he's involved in every facet of production, but he doesn't direct it. His fingerprints are all over it, but he's not the actual director of the film. I think it would probably have worked out better. Because as we see in episode 5 and 6, the performances are so much better. Yeah, the dialogue is still clunky. There are some weird things that characters are saying, and things don't flow maybe the best, and that's kind of George Lucas's, writing, but I think in Empire Strikes Back, it still works. Return of the Jedi, it still works. And it's because of the performances that the directors were able to get from the actors. And George just isn't that type of director. So I think if he handed the prequel trilogy off to another director, I think it would have elevated everything, and we might not be so divisive on it today. There are some things that pretty much everybody agrees on, though. We've got, the beauty of Naboo, the excitement of the pod racing sequence, seeing a time when the Jedi were plentiful and were still the guardians of the galaxy. And then, of course, there's Duel of the Fates. It's the sequence, it's the music, it's all of it. It's all perfection. That reveal of the dual-bladed lightsaber still gives me chills to this day when he ignites that second blade. It's so good. Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon being an absolute badass, and you know what? Honestly, if he had survived, Anakin 100% does not go to the dark side. He wouldn't have put up with the Jedi's BS, but he wouldn't have gone to the dark side. The world building in The Phantom Menace and the prequels in general is magnificent. It sets everything up so wonderfully, so that way it's not only connecting to episode 4, 5, and 6, but provides greater context to the struggles that the characters in those films are facing. Anyway, The Phantom Menace is number 6, and I stand by it. Number 5, Rogue One. Rogue One is the closest we get to a modern-day original trilogy film. It's the feel, it's the tone, it's not to mention the actual characters themselves that are featured in episode 4. It not only sets up A New Hope brilliantly, it also plugs a fairly large hole that's looming over A New Hope. Why would the Death Star have such a fatal flaw, and why would the Empire not know about it or be trying to fix it? Well, thanks to Rogue One, it all makes sense now. I love Rogue One because it explains why there's a flaw in the Death Star, but it's not just fan service. It's actually servicing the characters themselves. It actually impacts the Rogue One story and characters in ways that are engaging and authentic. Something this film does so well is presenting the rebellion in such a Star Wars way. What I mean by that is in the original Star Wars trilogy, the rebellion is presented as this sort of underground movement across many star systems, but we're just seeing one piece of it. Whereas the sequel trilogy's resistance always felt to me more like this sort of band of people fighting back, and it wasn't this big interconnected sort of network fighting back. and it just felt smaller. It felt, and I think it's just in the way that it was presented and shown. I know at the end of Rise of Skywalker, a lot of people show up, but it's still not the same. It still feels small. The world still feels small compared to the original trilogy. Here in Rogue One, it feels big again. Of course, everyone loves the Darth Vader hallway scene. I do too. You know, the tension, I love the pacing of the scene. Like, Darth Vader is absolutely relentless in that scene. Which is fantastic. You know, the original trilogy did such a great job of, you know, setting Vader up to be this evil, powerful being that was feared by all. You know, it was his voice, it was his costume, it was small things like being able to force choke someone from across the room.
The rebels' hidden fort.
You know, small gesture, big impact. Whereas Rogue One goes all out in showing just how powerful Vader is by him taking on everyone and demolishing every single person in his path. And so I like both. I like both of those displays. Number 4, Episode 4, A New Hope. A New Hope, the one that started it all. Now, I'm not one of those people who call this entry Star Wars. It's called A New Hope. Listen, you can call this entry whatever you want, but please don't be those people online where you're like, well, when I was growing up, it was called Star Wars. No, it wasn't. It was called Star Wars for what, 3 years at maximum? So, you know what? It's called A New Hope. So I've just read so much online debate with this, and I just had to say my piece. Anyway, for the ranking, this was tough. You know, putting A New Hope at 4 was a tough choice. This film is magic. This film is magical. Not only did it start a new franchise, but it looked so damn good. The sets, the costumes, the makeup, the miniatures, the effects, everything. Rewatching it is a magical experience because this is how films used to be made, and that's special. You know, I also kind of had trouble placing this film because it's an important film in film history, right? So what changes that? Where does it go? I don't know. I struggled a lot. You know, A New Hope really started it all and honestly kind of revolutionized film. So it would be number 1 if that was the most important factor. It's not. I do have to factor it in, but it's not the most important factor. So, you know, I feel pretty good about it being number 4. The film has everything. You know, it has a boy becoming a hero, a princess, a smuggler, an evil lord, aliens, lightsabers, a duel, spaceships. What more could any child ask for? Honestly. And that's what Star Wars is all about. It's about the kids. You know, like I've mentioned in this video, people tend to attach themselves to a trilogy they grew up with, and it's because Star Wars is for kids. You know, adults can still enjoy the films, obviously, but these films are for kids. Number 3, Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Yep, I really like The Last Jedi. And, you know, this film swings, and I know for most people it strikes out, but for me it hits a grand slam. The Last Jedi is the only sequel film that really tries to do something original and fresh and reinvigorating instead of just rehashing the same old tired things that happened in the original trilogy. And for that, I appreciate it. It's not just fan servicing and nostalgia baiting, it's actually bringing something to the table. This film can be messy at times, there's no doubt about that. But there's so much to love about this film. It's bold, it's beautifully shot, there's so much meat on these characters. And I honestly kind of like how Rian Johnson looked at The Force Awakens and was like, yeah, that's cool, but... and then proceeded to turn everything on its head. And not in a, like, saving face kind of way like Rise of Skywalker did based on the reaction to The Last Jedi. It's more of a, okay, you got the adventure out of the way in Force Awakens, now let's actually dive into the characters. A lot of people hate what happened to the character of Luke in this film. I love it. Luke is the realest character in this entire film. So I love his line of, what do you think is going to happen? I'm just going to face the whole First Order? Because it shows just how much the Resistance doesn't have an actual plan. They want Luke back just to have Luke back. There's no real purpose or plan for any of it. You know, his other line I love is, it's time for the Jedi to end. Luke gets it. Luke gets it. I love how this film portrays how good and bad aren't as clearly divided as everyone thinks. You know, Luke being broken and flawed is exactly what I want. And, you know, he does have a character arc. But I think that line of, you know, it's time for the Jedi to end is just so powerful because he understands that the Jedi maybe are not the heroes that we thought them to be in the original trilogy. There's small things that I love about this film, like Snoke telling Kylo to take the ridiculous helmet off.
That ridiculous thing off.
Because I loved that. When I watched this in theaters, I smiled because I thought the helmet was so stupid in Force Awakens. And so when Snoke said that, I was like, finally, a character in the film understands it. That's great. It's amazing to call that out. When Leia's message from A New Hope was displayed by R2, that was a great example of how to do fan service well.
Years ago, you served my father in the Clone Wars. Now he begs you to help him in his struggle against the Empire. I regret that I am unable to present my father's request
It
to
was
you.
a cheap move.
It was not for the fans. It was actually for the characters in the film. The fans just got to enjoy it. That's the way you do it right. I also love the world building that we get in The Last Jedi. You know, the island is jam-packed with so many wonderful things, like the cute porgs. Oh, they're so adorable. The island caretakers, which provide some humor and lightness. The milking scene, which is equal parts funny and disturbing, but in a great way. The pit Rey finds herself drawn to. I loved that sequence and how that was built up. And then, of course, you just get some beautiful sequences, like the throne room sequence. My God, that's so good. The Holdo maneuver, which is really, really cool. And, of course, Crate. It's one of the most visually stunning films in the entire saga. The cinematography is fantastic here. And, of course, you get the relationship between Rey and Kylo that really starts to develop in a meaningful way in this film, and I really wish it was able to be paid off in Rise of Skywalker, because this film does a tremendous job of diving deep into these characters and creating that conflict between them and themselves. Number 2, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Okay, listen. The Empire Strikes Back is the best film in this series in terms of being a film, okay? No doubt about it. Hopefully that makes sense. No doubt about it. It is the best. Is it the best Star Wars film? No. I don't think it is, anyway. So that's partly why it falls to number 2. Realistically, if I think about each of Empire Strikes Back and the next movie in the list, which you obviously already know what it is, if I think about them for too long, I do flip-flop. So one will be number 2, one will be number 1, and then I'll be like, oh, that needs to go there. Like, this is the toughest one for me by far. In this ranking, I really appreciate the hell out of both of these films, but Empire drops to number 2 because even though it's the best film in this series, it's not the best Star Wars film. So again, hopefully that makes sense. Empire deepens everything from A New Hope, characters and world building, and of course we get that famous twist that changes everything for Luke. You know, the planets that we get to visit in this film are absolutely iconic. We've got the Hoth battle at the beginning, which is so damn good. Bespin and Dagobah are just unique worlds that mesmerize us when we watch it. For a series that's meant for kids, I will say this is probably the most adult Star Wars film that we get, and I think that's maybe why it resonates with so many people, and it becomes most people's number 1 favorite. Because even once the nostalgia factor is gone, you can still appreciate just how good this film is. The film is so well paced, and my God, the cinematography in this film is so good. It's on a whole other level compared to many other films, and definitely the original trilogy. This is tops for cinematography. Empire Strikes Back basically takes everything from A New Hope and dials it up to 11. We get a Vader and Luke battle, and Luke fails. You know, the rebels fail. Everyone fails. I love it. I think it's great. You know, Han and Leia's relationship matures, but still retains the fun from A New Hope. You know, I like the fact that there's no Death Star. There's no big bad killing machine that can destroy everything in one fell swoop. You know, this film is about the characters. It's about the characters, how the relationships work with one another, and really how the world of Star Wars grows. Number 1, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So with Empire Strikes Back being number 2, obviously this means Revenge of the Sith is my number 1 choice. I know this film is very divisive. You know, some people can't stand it and think the entire prequel trilogy is trash. Some people love it. Actually, I mean, a lot of people do. Did you see how much the re-release made this past weekend? Insane. Fantastic, but insane. So, if you love Revenge of the Sith, you're not alone. I love it too. You know, is it the best film in the series in terms of filmmaking? Well, no, definitely not. That goes to Empire Strikes Back. I would place this film in the middle of the pack in that regard, actually. But I believe it's the best Star Wars film, and I enjoy it immensely every single time I watch it. Revenge of the Sith is a tragedy. It's where the space opera that began with A New Hope in 1977 closes the loop and fulfills its destiny. It is an epic, heartbreaking film. Anakin's fall from optimistic little boy to hate-fueled Darth Vader is complete. I love this film because it represents, to me anyway, that he did truly fulfill his prophecy, bringing balance to the Force. I love that the Jedi are maybe not the heroes of the story that we thought that they were in the original trilogy, that we've been led to believe, and they also have a pretty interesting part to play in Anakin's downfall. You know, I love that this film is deeper than just light versus dark. There is lots of gray in between where we operate, and this movie really gets to play within that zone really, really well. Now, to the film's credit and the filmmaking, there are some exceptional sequences in this film, probably the best of the prequels in terms of cinematography, even with overloaded CGI, because even those visual effect shots are actually quite good, and the best of the prequel series. So the score by John Williams is excellent. In fact, that's one of the highlights of the prequel trilogy for me, is the score. I believe it's on par with the original trilogy. The sequel trilogy's score is good, but I just don't think it quite hits the highs of the prequel trilogies. Battle of the Heroes is excellent, especially when it gets intertwined with Duel of the Fates. Oh, damn, it's so good. Now, the dialogue is still a mess, and the direction, like I said for Phantom Menace, I believe it was, if George had given the director's chair to someone else, maybe someone a little bit more capable in getting these performances out from these actors, you know, I think this trilogy would be loved by all. Now, I will give George credit. There are some beautifully directed sequences. For instance, like the opera scene where Palpatine recites the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Chills. That scene is so, so good. So, you know, it's not all bad, but for the most part, George just can't get the clunky dialogue to work. And I don't even know if he really tried, because he's not that type of director. And as we see in Empire Strikes Back, the clunky dialogue can work if you have a director that can get the performances from the actors. But yeah, Revenge of the Sith #1. So that's my ranking of the 11 live-action Star Wars films. What do you think? Do you think I'm nuts for having The Last Jedi so high and Return of the Jedi so low? Let me know. I'm sure a lot of people will think that. And if you enjoyed this, please let me know, because I'm thinking about maybe doing some rankings in the future of some other series and other films and the like. Anyway, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you in the next video, and may the 4th be with you.